Hi friends, have you ever heard that healing from past experiences can help us grow? And thought, okay, yeah, but what does that actually mean? In this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about what it has meant to me, how I have made it work, and how I continue to do it to this day. My name is Raquel Perez, and I am a licensed professional counselor candidate in the state of Colorado. If you're new here, welcome, and if you're returning, welcome back. This is where I share mental health content with a twist as I share my own lived experiences and how my mind and body has processed the information. With that, let's go ahead and get started. Recently, I had a very good friend contact me through my social media to let me know about how my most recent video about depression had impacted him and his life. And it was wonderful to hear from him. We had a great conversation. Immediately after I ended the conversation, I became completely overwhelmed with emotion. And I let my body do what it needed to do, and emotion completely filled me, rose, and I cried for several minutes alone in my room. And this cry felt different than many of the times that I had cried before, thinking about my depression and what it had done to me and my family and my kids. This time when I cried, I felt as though my body was doing exactly what it needed to do. And after I was done, I felt relief, which I had never felt before. And I just had this settling feeling that my body indicated what I needed, and I allowed it to do what needed to be done. I trusted my body to take over and to flow through the experience as it needed. So I would like to share a little bit more about how I got to the place where I was able to identify what my body needed and sit with that and allow my body to take over and ride that emotional wave that was coming up from my conversation with my friend. This is something that I have strung together after processing and looking back at my situation in hindsight. By the way, this is also something that I have noticed is very common. When we are healing and processing, very rarely, if ever, are we able to identify what it is that is happening in real time. Most of the time, this process of stringing together that stream of thought and making sense of it is something that happens in hindsight. Just something I thought I'd share. At the time that I found myself to be incredibly and severely depressed, I didn't know what was happening, and I definitely couldn't put a label. I didn't associate the word depression with what was happening. All I had were negative narratives floating around in my mind that were incredibly cruel and mean. These narratives continued to tell me that I was lazy, that I was unmotivated, and that I was simply just a horrible person, which made me feel ashamed and embarrassed. It made me not really allowed to admit to myself, much less anyone else, what I was experiencing, what I was going through, and how difficult my situation was of being a single mom. However, once I became a little bit more removed from the situation, in other words, I wasn't really in the situation of those negative narratives and the severe depression. Once I was a little bit more removed from that, I actually came across a very compassionate and empathetic individual, someone who really allowed me to trust the space, and I shared with her a little bit of my story. Because of her compassion and her empathy, I was really able to sit with the feelings. I was really able to sit with the experience and the situation that I was in. I was able to be more honest with myself and admit the way that I had shown up in my life at that time, the way that I had shown up for my children at that time, and really the way that I had not shown up for my children at that time. Once I was able to admit some of these things, it actually became very overwhelming because I became overwhelmed with feelings of shame and guilt. Those feelings of shame and guilt were so heavy that they didn't allow me to see past what I had caused, what I had done in that moment of my severe depression, and how I had lacked to show up for my children and show up for my life at that time. They weren't really allowing me to have self-compassion with myself and with my story. I was definitely not able to sit with compassion for why I was showing up in a way that felt so distant and so disconnected from my children. As more time passed, I was able to continue to process my experience, and I was able to continue to actually process the guilt and the shame that was coming from sharing my experience. This allowed me to really accept what had happened, what I had done, and it began to start to open up curiosity inside of me as to why I was showing up in this way with my children, why I was showing up so distant and so disconnected. And at the time that I started to open up this curiosity, I didn't even realize that I had been as distant and as disconnected as I had. The processing of the shame and the guilt really allowed me to hear and listen to the feedback of my children and their perspective of their experiences and what it had caused for them in those experiences. This allowed me to begin to dissolve my desire to protect myself and to defend myself and really sit with the feedback that they were giving me. That curiosity allowed me to begin to be curious about my own childhood experiences. I was then from there able to begin to connect and draw lines between my own childhood experiences and the way that I was showing up as an adult and as a parent myself. Once I was able to make those connections, I was able to really have self-compassion for my child self, for the young person that I was that experienced the things that they experienced and led to them showing up in the way that they were showing up. When that compassion came, I was also able to have compassion for the person that I had become, the person that I was showing up in the world as, because it was so directly connected to my childhood experiences. And once I had the compassion for myself, I was able to be more ready to admit to people and share my story of what I had been through and what my experience was like. I started to share that story with a larger audience on my social media. I felt so alone, and I felt like if I shared my story with others, they wouldn't feel as alone as I did. However, after I had that interaction with my friend recently, I realized that not only were other people not going to feel so alone, I also wasn't going to feel so alone in my experience, because it taught me that we have so many experiences in common, and we have so many experiences that we can share that'll allow us not to feel so alone in what we are experiencing, and it will also allow others to not feel as alone in what they are experiencing. And once all of those pieces had been strung together and had been put in place, I was able to, that evening after talking to my friend, allow everything that those painful experiences come up and really sit on the surface. For me, it was tears coming up so that these strong emotions that had long been hidden and tried to be forgotten, so that those strong emotions could come up so that I could feel them and so that I could really release. And with that came a sense of relief that I really cannot sit here and describe and put into words today. I'm not sure where exactly you are in your process and in your journey. However, I strongly encourage you to pinpoint where you are in your process, where you are in your journey, and what it is that will allow you to continue to move through that journey and move through that process. Well, friends, that's all I have for this video. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to watch and to listen. If you found it useful or helpful in any way, please hit that like button down below. If you're interested in getting more content like it on a weekly basis, please subscribe. Until next time, bye for now.